The ownership of anything is a burden. Okay, what happened here? What happened? Let's take a look. Let's go back to 1776. We go back to 1776, and the average house was $1,000. And again, we're going to give you some books and documentation. The loaf of bread was a penny. Okay, the dollar was $1. The income tax was 0. Okay, and we still had M1. Okay, now 137 years go by. Okay, all these years go by, and what do we have? Why, we have no inflation, do we? Now, what do we hear when we go to school? Why, inflation has always been with us. Inflation is a perennial problem. Whoops, not for America. Not for the first 137 years, was it? And we've always had taxes. Well, not for the first 130 years. We didn't have these taxes. By the way, you know, Will Rogers says there is a difference between death and taxes. Did you know that? He said that death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. Okay, but anyway, so what we have here, you see, is that, okay, okay, is you see that basically we have 137 years here where there wasn't any income tax or any inflation. Isn't that interesting? We didn't hear this in school, did we? We didn't hear that there was a big difference between 1776 to 1913 and 1913. We didn't hear this in economics. We didn't get this in history, did we? A few things kind of left out of the school system, isn't it, see? Well, suppose I went to school and I taught this. How long do you think I'd be on the faculty, see? See, not very long. Probably till about the college president heard I was teaching something like this, because this is not to be taught on a college campus, because this does not produce adjustment, you see. And that's what they're after with the kiddies, is adjustment. Isn't this interesting? It's not necessary that Johnny learns to read, write, or spell. It's necessary that he's adjusted. We have now just discussed higher learning. See, actually higher learning is dangerous, so you don't get any of it. You just get more years in school. It's devoid of higher learning, isn't it? All right? Because you'd be all upset if you learned something happened in 1913 that wasn't going on before, wouldn't you? And that wouldn't produce adjustment, you see. So therefore, the government must run all the schools to make sure that this adjustment is induced. All right, let's take a look at this. Okay. Well, you know, you say, well, things are different now. You know, it's not as simple, you know, so forth and so on. You don't want any of these simplistic answers and, you know, all this garbage that explains why people can't explain what they learned when they went to school. It's complicated, okay? All right, let's take a look at this. What happened in the country from 1776 to 1913? Was this good for the country, or was it bad for the country? So let's just analyze this for a minute, okay? What was the impact of no taxes, no income taxes, and no property taxes, well, a little bit of property taxes, but certainly no inheritance taxes on the country, where people could actually acquire property and keep it? Was this good or was it bad? Was this a positive incentive or was it a negative incentive? See, so forth and so on. So let's just take a quick look back through history, and we'll take a look and say, well, history started, I think, about the year, what was it, 3000 BC or something. It was the first time Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Pentateuch, they call it. And from the Garden of Eden, which is about 3,000 years BC, something like that, okay, until America was started, 1776 AD, here, okay, what do we have? Approximately 5,000 years, something like that. And then we have a little period of time after this, okay, to 1913. Okay, little period of time. Okay, now, from this period of time to this period of time, what happened? If Adam and Eve wanted to go somewhere, they'd probably ride a horse, don't you imagine? Now, if George Washington wanted to go up to Philadelphia to the Continental Convention, and he left Mount Vernon down in Virginia, how do you suppose he would travel? He'd ride a horse, wouldn't he? So notice what we have. 5,000 years goes by, people are riding horses. That's interesting. Not a whole lot of progress, is there? Okay, let's go back. We'll look at the Bible here. We'll go back into Gideon, the Valley of Midianites. Remember, he was up there and he had all these Midianites down the valley, and they signaled to him, and they waved lanterns. This was like about 2,000 years BC. This was back in the book of Judges, okay? Now, notice, if you wanted to send a message at night 4,000 years ago, you waved a lantern, didn't you? Isn't that interesting? Now, question, here's the biggie. When Paul Revere wanted to notify us that the British were coming just 150, 200 years ago, how was he able to signal that? He put a lantern in the belfry, didn't he? Isn't that interesting? 4,000 years later, guys are waving lanterns. Hi, George. Hi, Sam. How are you? See? Good. Well, time to go. See, waving lanterns. Not a whole lot of progress, was there? Why? Because if anybody invented something, it would be taken away from him and used against him. That is called socialism. That's called from each according to his ability to each according to his need. So no, everybody makes sure he doesn't have any ability. We've now described America's welfare program. If you work, you lose. If you produce anything, out. Only if you are a non-productive, unmarried person bearing children are you eligible for these rewards. Now, what's happening to the homes in America as a result of this? Is this good for America or bad for America? What are we getting? We get what we pay for. Have you ever noticed that? If we want to pay for licentiousness, we want to pay for no production, you simply buy it. And it happens. And what is our money going for? Something that's good for the country or bad for the country? You see. Isn't that interesting? We haven't got to wars yet. We'll get to that. Wars are even more interesting because that kills the people quicker. Sometimes you can't wait for a generation. You have to do it right away. The money buys that. Okay, now notice what we have here. During this period of time, what happened in the United States? Well, let's see. We had Robert Fulton comes along. He invents a steamboat. The newspapers didn't like it. The newspapers don't like much. They're still run by the English bank. We'll get to that later. And they called it Fulton's Folly and so forth. But he made the equivalent of today, millions of dollars, and he kept it. No tax. Well, this got to be exciting, wasn't it? Because it turns out that if you could build something that someone else benefited from and they would buy it, you would make a, quiet, profit. We don't say those words around USC, do we? Profit. Oh, very bad, greedy, filthy. You see all these things that are attached to profit? Profit is what caused the progress. Guys could keep what they earned. Isn't that exciting? Hey, the first time in history this ever happened. And no nation on earth had ever developed where the people could keep what they earned. You always had this problem of having sharecropping and so forth. That's where a lot of your wages go to the lord of the manor. You recognize it today. It's called withholding. Okay, you see? And see, we have these new names for old slavery. You see? And the result is we produce nothing. How many guys do you know don't want to work extra overtime or don't want to get any more money? It's just it's a big burden because now they lose it. Why work for something that they can't keep? You see the negative impact here of this stuff. Okay? Now, all right, so we find here some interesting stuff. We have Eli Whitney comes along. He invents a cotton gin. All the cotton mills and the presses in Europe collapsed. You know what England did? They passed a law that the cotton gin was illegal in England. Boy, that would stop it, wouldn't it? The whole garment industry in England totally collapsed. Nobody produced anything anymore. It was dead in a doornail. It was all produced from New York. Isn't that interesting? It still is. See, you can't make a law that outdoes economics. I mean, economics is the ultimate law. We're going to talk about this today. Economics is the law of why people, of motivation, why people do things. All right. What somebody once said that the pen is mightier than the sword, but the purse always buys the pen. Stay with the purse. This happened in the case of Karl Marx, where the Bank of England actually bought his pen. He's buried in England, London, of course, where his employers were. He never went to Russia. Isn't that interesting? Okay. All right. The purse buys the pen. Let's remember that. All right. The most important thing is who pays for it, because who pays for it gets what he pays for it. Well, we find that Cyrus McCormick comes along. He invents a reaper, makes what's equivalent to $1 million today, keeps it. And other guys are noticing this. Matter of fact, people are coming from Europe now because this is now called the New World, the land of the free, the home of the brave, the melting pot, if you will. People are saving up their money in Scandinavia and every place else. Their big dream is to come to America. You see, why? Because they keep what they earn. Well, a little while later, Samuel Morse invents the telegraph, keeps all the money. Matter of fact, he bought all the, much of the land up around Monterey, up the coast in there, all the canneries and so forth, and his posterity still owns that. He passed it on down to his grandchildren, his children's children, and so forth, and they still own that. They still have it in the family, you see, because he invented a telegraph. Isn't that interesting? A few other things, too. Well, we find that a guy came along by the name of Alexander Bell, and he invents a telephone. Isn't this interesting? He keeps the money. Well, another fellow comes along by the name of Marconi. Now, Marconi actually invented the radio in Italy. He didn't dare introduce it there because the government would take it away from it. It'd be a government radio. So he went to England, and he tried to introduce it in England, and they put him in a mental institution. They put him They put him in, and meanwhile, the boys in the bank got his invention, and 20 years before he was able to get to America and release the invention, they were talking back and forth between London and New York. Isn't that interesting? With his radio. But nevertheless, he was able to get out of the funny farm and come over to America, where he introduced it and made millions of dollars as a result of inventing the radio. He didn't dare introduce this invention in any other country. It would be taken away from him. It would be stolen. That's why in the first 5,000 years, nobody invented a radio. It's really not hard to figure that out, is it? If you've been in the Army, you understand how that works. Anybody who produces anything in the Army is taken in and given what they call a GI shower. The other guys don't like it when you do things that make them look bad. You stand in the middle of the third row, you never volunteer for anything, you wear the same suit, and you don't look any different and you don't do any differently. You got that? Because the next shower is with a lie. You see, and you can take care of guys that produce things. Because the peer pressure not to produce is extremely high, you see, if that information is used against the other people. In other words, if you peel potatoes twice as fast as the norm, the next guy has to peel potatoes faster. That is a threat to him. And they'll take care of you. There's ways to do that. Sometimes it's called missing in action. But you will not peel twice as fast. Got it? Under no condition will that ever happen. You see? Any progress is penalized. And as a result, nobody produces anything. It's pretty simple to figure out, isn't it? All right. A fellow comes along by the name of Thomas Edison. He invents some electric lights, some recorded sound, and so forth and so on. Makes millions of dollars. He keeps it all. Can you imagine this? These guys kept it. Wasn't that greedy? It's hard to believe. All these inventions are made by these greedy people, isn't it? All right. And then now you got the Wright brothers come along. They invent some airplanes. They fly around, keep the money. This is interesting. Henry Ford comes along, introduces the mass production of automobiles. People are driving. There aren't even any roads. Henry's driving all over in cow trails. Model T's this high off the ground so they can go through the mud. Only in America. Notice these things didn't come from any other place. Oh, there was a spin-off, and France could copy us. After we had the airplane, then they could copy the airplane. And after we had the mass production automobile, then they could copy that. You see, notice the most advanced technological country today. Now, I come from up in Silicon Valley, up there in San Jose area. And it's really interesting because we hear about the Japanese and the Germans and all the Koreans and all these guys that are you know, passing us in the production of stuff. But you see, they're not passing us in the development of things. The only thing that they can produce is a copy of what we invented last Friday. You notice that? It's really fascinating. But because there's still enough private enterprise available here that it rewards innovation, and it doesn't exist in the other countries. The only thing that exists there is the copycat thing, where they can actually maybe take apart something that's already been made, and then they can figure it out maybe how to do it a little better. But they can't come up with something new to make. Oh boy. You see, this only happened in America. Because only in America could you keep it if you made it. Over there, it would be taken away from them. Now, the thing changes. If a Japanese person comes over here, it all changes. Now he can invent things too. You see, it's not his race, it's his economy. See, because you can't say Italians are stupid because Marconi invented the radio. It's just in Italy they don't do anything. Okay? And neither would you if you lived in Italy. And neither would I, because it's just taken away. It's better off to just go down to the beach and go swimming and forget it. Which they've been doing for 5,000 years. All right, we went literally from horse and buggies to the age of flight in about, just a little over 100 years after the Constitution was written. Isn't that interesting? Now, what marked that period of time? What was the distinguishing characteristic? The distinguishing characteristic was no income tax and no inflation. Are we having fun? That's what produced the greatest progress the world has ever seen. So our thesis today is the greatest, the most patriotic, the most red-blooded, all-American thing you could possibly do is make all the money you can make and pay no tax. It's America one. Now what we're going to show you is that there were two countries. Okay? We have here America 1 and we have here America 2. Let me explain the primary difference between the two of them.